Yes, we're live.
Hello and welcome to the first ever Urban Manifesto webinar event. We are delighted to welcome you all here today, this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're watching in from. Urban Manifesto is a cross-continental meeting of minds between myself, Lucy Bullivant, the founder of urbanista.org, which is my webzine dedicated to livable urbanism, because in my book, there is no other type of urbanism of value, and Prathima Manohar, who is the founder of the Urban Vision platform. I'm in the UK, Prathima is in India. And we are, together with invited guests over every Tuesday for as long as we can go, keep this going, we are investigating the necessary components of a manifesto for a healthier, happier, and more livable urban future, urban places, which actually have all these characteristics and capacities. And as we transition through the pandemic emergency into a new era, we want to make sure that our manifesto, which is, after all, it's a political statement, epitomizes the progressive, holistic values that we and our invited guests believe in. We are at a momentous point in history. We're on the cusp. And we thought that in lockdown, we should make best creative use of our time. So over to you, Prathima, to introduce our guests and the theme.
Thank you, Lucy. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a truly global community across the continents. I'm Prathima Manohar from the Urban Vision. We are so excited to also welcome the Architectural Foundations community on this livecast. We're on the schedule of the 100-day studio as well. So thank you all for joining us and welcome to the Urban Manifesto. I always say that our streets are the soul of the city and the public space where our life unfolds. As the world experiences various stages of lockdown due to this pandemic, our access to our streets and public spaces have been severely restricted. Many of us are appreciating and craving our streets and public spaces now more than ever, given that it's been taken away from all of us. In our first episode of the Urban Manifesto, we're going to focus on streets as places of interaction and mobility. We are so thrilled to have two amazing people join us today to talk to us about this. We have Dinah Bornat, architect and co-founder of ZCD Architect based in London, and Demetrio Scopelliti, who is joining us from Milan, and he is the advisor to the Deputy Mayor of Milan. Thank you both for joining us. And how are you doing during this lockdown, Dinah?
Good, yeah. I'm in London and it's changed a lot. You're absolutely right, but I'm good, yeah.
Demetrio, how are things during the lockdown?
Yeah, I'm fine, but I miss public space.
All of us do.
Not surprising.
You know, the first segment of this episode and this series is the outline of the Urban Manifesto, where we've requested our speakers to share a brief 3-point agenda on making our cities better places. And in this specific episode on how to make our streets better places for interaction, mobility, and better quality of life. So I'm going to invite Dinah to start her 3-point plan for making our streets better places. Dinah, what should be an important 3-point agenda to make our streets better places?
Okay, thanks, Prathima. I'm going to, I'll go to the full screen. Is that right? Oh, have you, sorry. Do you want to share again? Thank you. So I've got 3 points that I want to talk to. freedom, permission, and good design. I'm going to start with freedom. And we all must be feeling the loss of our freedoms right now. I've chosen this photograph, which is by my good friend, the photographer Madeline Waller. I've worked with her before to take pictures of children playing out, but this is a photograph I don't often use. It seems really ordinary. In fact, it's something that I don't think we ever would have imagined that children wouldn't be allowed to do, just being together like this. And that loss of freedom, I think we're feeling really keenly. Usually I show pictures of children cycling and having fun and playing and climbing trees to sort of bring home the importance of those freedoms and the ones that we remember from our own childhood. But this image has got real poignancy, I think, at the moment. It's kind of relaxed and effortless coming together. And anyone who has children at the moment will be really witnessing their pain right now and their longing to be with their friends. And they've been locked down for so many months now, and whilst our objective is to keep them safe and to make sure that the virus doesn't spread, we can also imagine the huge impact this has on them, playing outside in the sunshine, making new friendships in the tricky world of being a teenager. Some of them will be returning to school next week in the UK, and we've been thinking a lot about this, but we need to think about all of their lives and we really owe them their freedoms as soon as we possibly can give them back. So whilst this might be hard to imagine at the moment, the future needs to be a place where they're able to get outside, meet friends on their own and play in ways that are easier than before, because they need this space and time to be with children if they're going to heal. Can you put the next slide on, please? Can I do that?
Yes.
I'm not quite sure how I do that. Okay. This is a new, here we go. Can you see the next slide, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the next slide is about permission. So we've seen streets with less cars, children wobbling on bicycles and chalking on pavements, and this is reminding us of our own childhoods. And we know that we want this for our children too, so it's time to start thinking how we can make it happen. We might be thinking about how to get to the shops and to work and back to school, but we're thinking a lot about walking and cycling, which is mostly about movement, but children move differently to us, and they're motivated by other things. They're motivated to play and to test the world around them. So this might seem frustrating if you're on your bike and late for a meeting, having to negotiate a small child in front of you. But if we slow down and give them space to be, to learn to move around safely and to learn through play on foot, on all fours, or just lying on the floor screaming sometimes, we make a better place for all of us. So that means placing children at this top of the pyramid of hierarchy, above adults, above bicycles and cars, in many ways being the most vulnerable road users. And if we design places for them which are safe from speeding cars, free of parked cars, and where we're aware of small children whose eyes are lower than a metre high from the floor, we'll have a better city for everyone. And this slide is part of a recent competition for a scheme in North London. It shows the important spot between street and front door, shows the threshold between public and private space, but it suggests a meeting place, somewhere you can talk to your neighbours, watch the street, passers-by and children playing. So this is what a child-friendly city looks like to us, spaces that people choose to go. And with this is a generous pavement with trees and seating. We know from our research, from observational work and focus group interviews, that these are the sorts of spaces that people cherish. They've got strong memories of growing up and playing with their friends here, and teenagers value them as well. They can hang out with their friends without having to make arrangements. Older people, parents, people tending their gardens, there's spaces for all ages and that make the child-friendly and age-friendly city. So those are my 3 points.
Thank you, Dinah. I think that's a great 3-point plan to think about future of streets.
So wonderful. Thank you very much, Dinah. And so similarly, Demetrio, so what is your 3-point manifesto for a happier, healthier, more livable urban future? Thank you.
So this is the first image I would like to use as a tool for my manifesto, where basically to demonstrate that the first point should be that the street is for all of us. When I say all of us, I mean no matter if we are young or old, no matter if we use a bike or a car, no matter if we walk or we have issues to move, and we should consider the street as a democratic place where everyone has the right to move safely and also in a healthy way. The second image I want to show is about the fact that we still have all, and we should all have the right to play. And when I say the right to play, I of course think about children, but I'm not talking just about children. We should all be able to enjoy the public space and the public life, and to learn, to become a community, to learn about citizenship, and staying together in a public space and enjoy our public life. It's what actually we missed during the lockdown period, the opportunity to go out and play, to go out and relax, to go out and meet our people. And the third image and keyword I would like to spend about for the manifesto is about creating sense of community. And I think that our challenge that we are living in this period is about how distancing can limit our ability to meet other people and to create sense of community. By, let's say, we have to reinvent the way we consider events. We have to reinvent the way we consider the use of public space. But we have to reinvent all these things without losing the control and the target about the fact that we would like to generate public spaces where we can meet together, which is a fundamental point.
Thank you. That's brilliant. I'm really the sense of community is something which is ever present in urbanists' discussions, and it just has become acutely important right now. You know, the sense of relationships, the interactivity between people, public spaces and human relationships are let's say, more dovetailed now than ever before, I think, in our living memories. Prathima.
Yeah. And I think, it's so nice to see a quick, brief overview that covers such wide principles for making places happier, safer, and more livable. So thank you for doing that brief overview on what our urban manifesto should be for the future of streets. And my first question to both of you is that, within just the last few months, due to this pandemic, the fabric of our cities have changed, especially the urban streets around our world have changed. It's brought to the fore the keen sense of impact human relationships and interactions. The human relationships and interactions take place in public realm. Suddenly we've lost the place where that most important character that we as humans have, which is engage, socialize. We've somehow lost that because of this pandemic and because of our fight against this pandemic. What can we learn from the changes many people are making in the ways they use streets during the lockdown, their new ways of moving and spending time outside? As the lockdown is relaxed, people of all ages continue to need more space to keep safe. They need more versatile, flexible streets to accommodate newer patterns of living, including social distancing. So what can we do to ensure changes to walking and using our streets for mobility during this crisis? And how do we deal with this new reality that we find ourselves in and ensure that we can use our streets more safely as places of mobility and interaction? Dinah, would you like to start?
Thank you. I think it's really interesting how it's changed already in the last few weeks. So, I mean, I think Italy went into lockdown before us, right? But we were towards the end of March, and in the early days, we were told to stay indoors, but we were allowed outside to get food or essential items or to exercise. So in London, what happened was immediately our streets kind of emptied of moving cars, not parked cars. And on our short journeys, we were able to walk along the middle of the road, and we could even cycle right into the middle of London, into Westminster or to Trafalgar Square, where it was empty. And you saw people doing that with small children, and we saw a city in a completely different way. It was breathtaking. And then we, like you're saying, we became more sort of localized in our view. We just saw our neighbours in the flesh, so to speak, everyone else on Zoom, and then we. But also at the same time, we were worrying about people who couldn't get outside, who had children that they needed to care for if they were elderly, they had less space, and there's been a lot of support. So all sorts of new things happened, but we've also seen speeding cars, and we are very fearful of places that are populated. And we're being watched by the police, we're being watched by park wardens, and we're being watched by each other, which is really quite unusual. So we all have different levels of safety and different levels of fear. Now we've, like anywhere, I think in the middle of the city, we've really been craving open spaces and nature, and it feels contested and it feels rationed, and that's really hard. But we've seen other spaces opening up, and in some instances being used in different ways. And whilst we've seen some people not sticking to the rules, and that seems to be quite a focus, which has quite some sort of kind of negative connotations, it's interesting, I think, to think about the people who we're not seeing outside. We're not seeing children outside without adults. We're not seeing teenage girls as much as we're seeing teenage boys. We're not seeing the fearful, and obviously we're not seeing the shielded and many others. So I think it's really important to think about as much about the people that we're not seeing outside as the ones that we are. And we need to support those that find it really hard, and think about how our streets can be made even safer for them, and shift away this emphasis from the big and loud voices, the wealthy and the powerful, and support walking and cycling, and think really hard about how we can bring as many people as possible along with us on the journey. And so it can't just be about the fit and the healthy. I like to think about the 4-year-old on a bike trying to cycle to school. I don't think we would be having that conversation 6 months ago. People would just not expect to see a 4-year-old on a bike cycling to school on a road. But now this is something we're really looking at. And in my family, we all cycle. My parents cycle in their 70s, and it's not always easy for all of us. You know, we all find challenges. My daughter was knocked off her bike just before lockdown. So we really need to think about how we can slow cars right down, shift them away from their sense of entitlement to the space and the safety that comes with being in a car. I think we've got quite a long way to go convincing transport engineers and highways engineers, but I think we've seen a little bit, and we need to hold on to that.
Demetrio?
Well, of course, the pandemic and the lockdown changed completely our lifestyles and our approach to public life from a day to another one, almost. And in Milan particularly, we were not prepared. We were maybe we were less prepared than other parts of the world, because we didn't see. We had just a Chinese example, and we were not prepared to such a change in our life. But the immediate reaction was the fact that we became more silent, and at a certain point, traffic went down completely, and we understood that the street could be much more livable without cars. That we could walk in the street, for instance. We could share the street with the auto vehicles, with something that actually is not so common in our cities, at least in Italy, even if it's in our past, of course it is. And that actually, even at distances, the social interaction could still happen by looking to each other, by also not just in the public space, but also in some semi-private spaces like balconies or terraces, and etc. So we actually change a bit the way we leave the public space without losing the the same goal and the same aim. And also, we find out that actually many people was moving the same, driving less and also using more other vehicles. Or many people try to cover distances by using a bike, or otherwise. We generated a city that, because of the lockdown and because of the impossibility to go far from your place, was a smaller scale one. Was a what we call 15-minute walking city. Basically, a city where you should try to have all your services around by just having a short walk. So we rediscovered that small shops and businesses could be fundamental in our social structure and social life, because of the impossibility to cover large distances. And actually, I think all these elements could be and should be something we should consider for the future, even hopefully without the pandemic or after the pandemic, in order to be able to improve our everyday life. And actually, many of these aspects are already in our agenda. The lockdown somehow was an opportunity to make the process quicker and to try to use this very negative moment of our lives as an opportunity to change quicker and in a better way our urban lives.
Thank you, Demetrio. So the next question is for Dinah. And Dinah, you are a very prominent child-friendly city expert based here in London. You've also written a number of authoritative reports that have been published in the last few years on the child-friendly city and the imperative to change planning policy to ensure that or to take steps towards actually realizing a more child-friendly city. Because it is very true to say, and I think Architects Journal was one of those that reviewed one of the reports, and they made the comment that, children are very noticeable by their absence in planning policy. So what are some of the key principles that you have held on to and made sure appear in all of the written documents that you've produced for various political bodies?
Well, thanks, Lucy. I think that what you just mentioned just then is you need to talk about them, because one of the, I'm an architect, I'm not a planner, but I have read through an awful lot of planning documents in the UK, particularly looking at sort of looking for child-friendly policies, and the main problem is that they're not mentioned, and when they're not mentioned, we don't work. It doesn't work for them. So there's been a bit of a shift. When you start drawing attention to it, they start being talked about more, and people start thinking about what that means for children, and even that in itself makes a big change. I think it means that they're brought up when we go to design review meetings where. If you don't know, planning authorities bring in architects and urban designers and others to help them review big planning applications that are going through a local authority level. So that kind of advice is really helpful for local authorities to kind of remind them to be thinking about how this might work for children. And the way that we have done that, looking at a kind of, particularly at the kind of national policy level, is to think about the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which has for several rights there, but these three specific rights: the rights to play, and the right to assemble, and the right to participate in matters that affect them. And those are really interesting because adults don't have a right to play. And actually, I absolutely agree with you, Demetrio. I think it's really important that we are all able to enjoy public space. But what's quite special about giving children that particular right is that it elevates them, if you like, to a kind of greater level, or it should do, and that we should pay attention to that because they are completely motivated to play all the time. And there's an awful lot you can learn from the way that children behave about thinking about what it is that they want to do, and how play for them isn't something that happens in a playground, activities that happen just there. It happens all the time, whether it's on screens or in their bedroom or in the kitchen or in the hallway or in the front, out the front door or in the street. If we let them, they will just play. That's what children are like, you know, that's what evolution has given us. So we really do need policy that supports that. We need policy that recognises and understands the way that they use space, and sort of sets them apart. And the way that we think about it, conceive about it, is to think about not what we call place-based provision, but the public realm being a place where they can play everywhere. It's not the only thing that happens in the public realm, but is something that they can do everywhere. So we should be thinking about that in a different way from, you know, where's the health centre, where's the school, where's the playground? And we need to be thinking about how we can create safe places for them to play. And so we look at the sort of physical aspects of that, to do with overlooking and connectivity between spaces, so that we get this kind of freedom that I was talking about in the manifesto, for them to be able to explore the world, and to sort of the vision really, and that needs to be in policy, is think of a city where children are seen outside, where they're part of the city. So all of those things need to be in place in policy, you know, the vision and the kind of the mention of them, and then that kind of focus on rights can be really helpful as well.
Thank you. That is so inspiring. I mean, I really just hope so dearly that at this moment where we're thinking hugely about the value of the local and about public space and community neighborhood space in much more detail, up close and personal being also political, that we can make sure that absolutely every single group within the communities are equally treated in the near future, since it's not yet the case, very sadly.
I agree with you, Lucy. I think, Dinah, that's such a great idea. Great city should be one where the children are seen outside. I think that's such a great agenda for a manifesto as well. My next question, Demetrio, is for you. And as the advisor to the Deputy Mayor of Milan, you're playing a huge role in progressive planning policies in the city. I'd love to hear from you more about the open streets and the tactical urbanism program, and how it's enhancing the livability of the city. And two, I'd love to also learn about what role the local communities are playing to bring this program alive. Demetrio?
So, yeah, everything started in 2018, when basically before the pandemic, we launched a program which is called Piazze Aperte, Open Plazas. Thanks to a collaboration with Bloomberg Associates and NACTO Global Design Cities Initiative, for generating new public spaces in the city of Milan, with tactical and light, quick and cheap intervention. We were already working a lot on the generation of new public spaces and to reclaim of public spaces instead of traffic and cars. But we were realizing, and I was realizing particularly, that we were very slow, because any structural intervention that we were planning was taking, let's say, 1 year of design, then 1 year of review, then maybe another year of detailed design, then maybe another year of approval and bid, etc., etc. So basically, it took 5 years. It takes 5 years with a normal process to generate a new public space. And that generation of public space is also, generally speaking, out of date the day you can realize it. So we had to generate a different approach and different process, and we started this tactical urbanism program to be able to generate public spaces in a month or in a couple of months, and not in years, and with much lower investments in order to be also to be able to try different and to test different solution and try to make some experiment on the design of public space. And the program was very successful. In 1 year, we delivered more than 10 projects. And what we actually realized is the first designs were top down, because we were trying to understand if we were able as a city to generate this kind of projects and program. After the first 2 interventions, basically many communities came to us saying, "Could you please help us to do something similar in our neighborhood place or neighborhood square, etc." And so basically, we generated more than 10 projects in a year, and after that, we launched an open call for new designs, asking the communities to collaborate with us and propose us different projects in different areas of the city. They could have been implementing, and also they could have been maintaining together with us. Then the lockdown came actually in the middle of this process. We are now trying to take it back. And what we did was, okay, the same process that we were generating for new public spaces, we could also use that for new bike lanes or for new pedestrian areas that maybe can be used for events or for other things during the pandemic, or even for allowing, again, bars and restaurants to open back and to activate public space with their tables and chairs. So basically, we are using tactical urbanism that we were learning together with the Piazza Aperte process to rethink our streets after the pandemic in order to make them better, in order to reduce traffic, to allow people to move in a different way. Of course, we have a very big constraint in the use of public transit as everywhere in the world, but we were actually our let's say main modal share is, of course, related to public transit. So we have to fix this, and we have to allow people to move without owning and driving a car. And actually, so we are now, let's say, expand the Open Plaza program to an open street program in order to be able to try to generate as many tactical urbanism projects as possible in the neighborhoods, in order to allow people to move better, to use public space in a different way, and to adapt, basically, our city to the new normal.
I think that's such a great story of small scale but high impact change that you can achieve very quickly. And especially now, we need to see more solutions such as this as we try to reopen our economies and our streets. So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, we'd love to actually get access to details of the program, so it can be a great prototype for other cities that have to quickly repurpose their public realm as we have to cope with this virus for at least another year or two.
Okay, so over to Dinah again. And my question, it relates to the reality that streets obviously appear in neighborhood residential developments as well, whether new build or whether there are retrofitted developments of older buildings, older ensembles of urban space. Now, I remember when I was growing up, that dreadful thing, the cul-de-sac, which was dominated by cars with no play space whatsoever, would seem to be far more prevalent than it is now in many, many cities. It still exists, unfortunately, but the quality of life of children who are having to play football in streets that are absolutely crowded and crammed full of cars is lamentable, and it's also dangerous on every level. So the question is, when you're approaching either a new build residential housing scheme or a retrofitting scheme, how do you ensure that you can build social value in from the very first moment in approaching the client or the client approaching you?
I'm going to say some good things about cul-de-sacs.
Oh, really? Yeah, they're not all bad. They're not all
Well,
bad.
it's really interesting because there's a real split on opinion on the cul-de-sac, which essentially is a street that doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
For anybody who isn't familiar with that phrase. So they were very common in kind of post sort of the 1930s onwards, if you like. But the problems with them really are to do with the kind of walkable neighborhood. They're really designed for the car. But what they did do was cut streets off from through traffic. So actually what you tend to see on cul-de-sacs is can often be quite a high levels of play, because you've got some of the factors in place that you need. And I actually grew up on a cul-de-sac of 7 houses when I was very young, and we played out there an awful lot because there were no cars driving through, and so for that reason they work quite well. It's nice to get the cars out of the cul-de-sac, and also to have routes that you can walk through the neighborhood so you don't have to take the long way round, if you like. So there are some aspects of it that don't work. But I think we are in danger sometimes of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you like, and thinking that we know all the answers by going back, say, to the Victorian street pattern. There are some good things about that kind of defensible space. And what we found in our observational work is that actually what the sort of factors that need to be in place are the ones that we sort of knew about before, to do with overlooking being massively important for children and adults. So children will look down to see if their friends are playing. Parents will want their children in sight. They'll call up to their friends as well, up to the balconies. And those are really important connections that people make. It's also, I think, really helpful to have a kind of direct, so having that direct view of a space. Often in developments, we're having to tell developers that a single aspect doesn't work with like a central corridor, because one half of the flats can't see into the space that you're designing for play. So maybe having a breakthrough where you've got the lift core or the stair core seeing into that space from the floor that you live on. And some of these moves are quite easy to make. And it's only when you start to talk these sort of issues through that developers say, well, I hadn't thought of that before. And for example, saying things like, we've become obviously very sort of security conscious these days with fobs, key fobs that people use to access their front door, but also to access shared spaces. But you wouldn't give those to a child. So how do they get around? How do they call back up if they're going into that shared courtyard? Is there a doorbell for them to call back up so that somebody can release the door and let them in? Otherwise, they're going to have to be taken downstairs every time they just want to run around and play, which everybody recognises isn't really the reason, the spirit behind some of these places that we're designing. So I think it's really thinking like the everyday life through the eyes of a child really helps us to understand how these spaces are going to work. Does that answer your question? I think it was slightly different from the one I was looking at, so I'm not reading from my script.
Yeah, well, I think yes, it does, because I think you probably agree that clients vary obviously in their willingness to be able to engage with these things, and budgets vary too. There are financial constraints. But it seems to me fundamentally imagining or inviting your clients to imagine and remember what it was like when they were a child, or imagine themselves a child again today, to think in terms of the immediate social value that they need in their living spaces and the spaces that they use to go to school and play and venture out beyond home into other places, youth centres and so on.
I absolutely love the detail to which you've thought it through. It's amazing because I live in India, and in developing world cities, I say we're designing our cities for cars instead of humans. So it's amazing to kind of see your vision of places for a child in our city. I think I think a city that is great for a child is such a great city for everybody, whether you're a pregnant woman or a senior citizen. So it's such a great detailed vision. So thank you for sharing that. And I want to take a moment to say hello to all the live audiences that are joining us. We are, here with you from multiple continents, actually. So, and it's different time zones for all of us. And I want to quickly say hello to all of you. We'd love to learn more about where you're from. So please leave a comment in the video below, and we'd love to hear your questions as well, and hear about how your cities are coping during this moment. And I have just shared the Open Street program detail from Milan. Thank you, Demetrio, for sharing that link. I have posted it for all of you to access the details of the program. But my follow-up question to Demetrio is about the OpenStreet program again. And I am very keen to learn from you with these quick win projects. How is the city evaluating them on a constant basis from the metrics of livability, social inclusion? How are you evaluating if they meet the standards that we all have as placemakers or urbanists?
Yeah. Well, basically, let's say that the whole project is based on the collection of metrics and data since the beginning of the design process on different aspects. So the solution that we shape comes from different analysis, including surveys to citizens and to communities, and also to evaluation of their requests. As I mentioned before, we did an open call, and communities responded with 65 proposals based on their needs and expectations. And during the after the implementation, let's say, we, of course, before the implementation, we collect also information through presentation and community workshops around the design solution. And then after the implementation, we basically continue to collect data and in different ways. We do direct observation. We collected and we analyzed time lapses to see the different uses of space, and we continue with the community meetings in order to hear about issues to be solved or point to be improved. And also we demanded a third-part survey in order to understand if the communities and people who use the space as different as opinions and as and have actually different suggestions for us in order to improve the project, or in a second temporary phase, or even in with the permanent one. So we have a continued feedback with the communities that collaborate with us on the projects, and also we try to monitor them from different aspects, including mobility and traffic, also by using metrics. So what we try to do is to always keep an eye on the design and the process, and to keep a strong relationship with the community in order to be able to analyze and understand the small scale and very local issues that the different communities has in the management and also the everyday life of the space.
Okay, next question before we, I think, move on. So next two questions, one to each of you before we move on to the audience questions. This is quite both a very simple and a very complex question for Dinah, which is that you're extending the more conventional focal points of architecture and urban design into a much broader kind of multi-generational approach. Have you been able to extrapolate from your research into the child-friendly city some extremely valuable principles and policy points concerning vulnerable members of society just generally? People who are otherwise very, very likely to be seen as either invisible or live, unfortunately, are forced or obliged to live a much more confined way of life?
Thanks, Lucy. I think at the moment that's a really interesting question, and I should say that I focus on child-friendly cities as a kind of vehicle for thinking about sort of all the aspects of the city, but I haven't got expertise in so much in the multi-generational sort of data, if you like. But I recognise that that it tends to be where places that are well used by children, particularly independently, tend to be well used by other age groups as well. So that suggests that they're kind of, you know, that the indicator species, as Mayor Pennilosa once called them. But I think at the moment, with the networks that I'm involved with, play workers and kind of activists and people who are kind of concerned and work with children and schools and youth centres, there's a real worry, a concern about children and young people who are trapped indoors at the moment, who are particularly vulnerable for lots of different reasons, because they may be vulnerable before lockdown for their sort of home circumstances. They may be vulnerable because of health reasons now that are now obviously come to the fore, and it's really critical, I think, that we think about that group. And indeed all vulnerable people, but within thinking about the sort of under 18s, if you like, that are unable to come outside, but probably, well, like all of us, they really need that social contact. How can we help them to do that safely? How can we entice them back outside? And I think the answer is that is local, isn't it? Because I'm not a scientist, but it's about exposure to lots of human beings, isn't it? And if we can kind of reduce that exposure down by making local spaces safe physically, then we can start to encourage people to come outside their front door, to start mixing again, to let their children come to school, because some of them are too frightened to do that. And I think so that there is this normally what we call the hard to reach group. They're not hard to reach so much as just that you need to go to them. I think we need to think about that even more now. And this fear that we've built up in the population is not going to go away, I think. And it's a new fear, isn't it? This is not a fear of being kidnapped or run over by a car or hurting yourself. This is a really different fear. So we're going to have to kind of work with that fear, and knowing that taking risk in life is a really important part of living. And working, working closely with people. But I think one of the problems that we have had in this pandemic has been really no clear guidance on how children are supposed to exist. And so in countries like Spain, where they haven't been allowed outside for 8 weeks, which is really quite shocking, I think, to just thinking about in the UK, where, for example, at the moment, one of the rules that they're allowing is that you can meet with one other person. So that doesn't work when a child is involved, because you'll already have an adult with that child. So really not thinking about how people are desperate for that support, for that social support, for that, for being able to see people, and they're still being told whether or not they obey by the rules to stay indoors. So I think in our sphere, we have a real focus at the moment about how we can think our way through, and play is this kind of really healing way of doing that. But we need to work out how to do that safely on the streets, I think.
Demetrio?
Well, of course, we are trying to take a multi-generational approach and to try to design space that can be used by all different kinds of citizens. It's something that is key in our approach, and we're trying to do it by studying the urban and observing the urban life in Milan, and to also use tools that can be used by different groups in order to generate diversity. For instance, what we learned as a great street furniture element that was incredible to activate the space and to generate intergenerational and very diverse gatherings in the spaces is the use of ping pong tables, which is something that actually we were very surprised to see how effective they could be in order to make children playing with fathers and even with grandfathers, having elderly commenting and seeing and watching the games, and having also other children playing and seeing and watching, etc. And actually, it's even good with social distancing and physical distancing, because it's not affected. And actually, was an incredible activator of the spaces. And we discovered, for instance, that some of the foreign communities in the city were also great players, and we changed completely the idea that, for instance, in some deprived spaces where we implemented new public spaces, we discovered that many of the foreign communities were actually that were already using the space and maybe were somehow looked as different and then not having great patterns of use, and actually they were just playing every day, and changed completely also the idea that other people had of them. And also with the Open Streets program, where we opened the new bike lanes, the tactical bike lanes that we are realizing in Corso Venezia and Corso Buenos Aires, which is one of the main axes in the city of Milan, we immediately found out that mothers and children and families were popping up on the bike lanes, and not just on Saturday and Sundays, but that particularly women are using a lot the new infrastructures, because actually probably in our society, generalizing, men drives and women use the public transport. So this is not possible anymore. So the most let's say affected in a positive way by the spread of new bike lanes were mothers and children's, and also by generating new safe infrastructure, we saw many more children than before, and there is a lot about this in terms also of generating what I was saying at the beginning. The streets could be for all and could be used by different groups and age. And then, for instance, we are now working a lot on the tables and chairs and parklets by restaurants and bars in order to generate, say, new social life and also economy for them after the lockdown. And we are trying to experimenting also different use of the space and of the street depending from the time. So a street could be, for instance, dedicated to traffic and including bikes during the day, and maybe can be pedestrianized at night in order to be lived as an open air restaurant, or otherwise a piazza could be used during the day as a playground, and during the night as a place where say young people could meet and gather together to have a drink. So the flexibility of the space and the adaptability of the public space and the street particularly is something that is key in order to consider an approach that could be inclusive and really dedicated to all.
We have a couple of audience questions at this point in time. We actually got it from YouTube, so it's not showing up for all of you to see. One is that where John is asking us, will we move towards cars for safety? Are you seeing cities around the world responding to this pandemic in the worst way possible, which is try to build more car infrastructure or make that more convenient?
That's not possible. There's if I can reply, I would say that basically there's not enough space, and no matter if it's safer and no matter if it's considered safer, we cannot do that because we don't have enough space and we cannot waste it, and we have to change the way we consider traffic and private transport in order to be able to move everyone safely. So it's of course true that we have an issue at the moment with the management of the public transport that in many of our cities is fundamental in order to move people. But it's evident that we have to generate alternatives that cannot rely on cars. They can rely on private transport, but not on cars, as we
But our
intend.
cities, are we seeing any trends in any of the global cities moving towards car-centric infrastructure at this point in time?
Well, we've got an issue in terms of investment. So sorry, were you waving this? We've got an issue in terms of investment, I think, and underinvestment in public transport, and money still being used to build more roads. So I think Demetrio's totally right. And I mean, in London, we're saying already that any slight increase in private car usage is just going to bring the city to an absolute standstill. So it's not going to work. Even with the issues to do with pollution aside, but I do think that we've got to shift our spending away from the private car and onto public transport, and we've got to think really hard about subsidising the public transport system. That's something that I think I don't know about in Milan. Do you subsidise your public transport system? Because we don't do that in London anymore, and that's a problem we're going to have to face.
We do it just for some groups, for age groups, or for certain economic groups. Of course, we have an issue now because the investments on public transport, and particularly on the everyday activity of public transport, is now very, very bad and negative in terms of economics. But it's not going towards cars that will solve our economic issues. If I see how big is the investments on maintaining asphalt in our streets every year, we would build millions of square meters of parks, really millions of square meters. And if I show you how big is how much space we waste because of the use of cars in our city, we would generate many more economic activity. This is also one of our key points, for instance, to try to use the pandemic and the impossibility now to keep the same number of tables and chairs inside the restaurant in order to make them use parking spots where possible. Because actually, to facilitate that, because we need more space. If we have to be more distant, we need more space. Something that is so simple.
Is that something you're going to do? Is that something you're about to do?
It's something we are working to do now, and I think it's something that we are working to do not just as Milan, but also all the cities in the world. London is working on this. London is pedestrianizing the center and other streets, and New York is pedestrianizing 60 kilometers of streets. We are generating 35 kilometers of bike lanes, taking out traffic and traffic corridors. We are working on the generation of new public spaces and on parklets. And Madrid is working on parklet program. Paris is working on a bike lane program, which is very ambitious. Auckland has a slow street program, which is generating spaces for playing and for community to relax and enjoy their public life, etc., etc., etc. I never heard of a city in this period that is saying we need to go back to the 20th century. And I think there won't be anyone doing that.
We got time for one more quick question, I think, from, is it right? Fabrizio Matilana, who was taking us back to that earlier discussion when we were talking about designing for the vulnerable, such as people with dementia. Can this focus be aligned with the needs of children, or is this another common line that needs to be addressed on its own terms in a different way?
I think it's the same. You can do the same kind of thinking. You just need to talk through a big piece of city or a neighborhood with what it's like to be the person that you're talking about. And, you know, you can have that conversation about somebody with dementia, or you can have it about a young child, and you can have those intersecting discussions, and you'll find that probably that that both can learn from each other. I mean, I know that there are sometimes issues to do with drop curbs and things that we need to resolve, but these shouldn't be the kind of sticking points. And actually, I think one of the things we might have found through the sort of shared surface idea is that perhaps people lose out when cars and people share space, because cars tend to win. So I think I don't see there's absolutely no reason why dementia or wheelchairs or you know, all of the different ways of using streets by different kinds of people are just as important. You know, just they can all work together to create this kind of intergenerational city.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree with you. So, Prathima,
I think this was such a great discussion.
We've run over an hour now.
Yeah. I want to quickly thank Demetrio and Dinah for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you much for inviting us.
Thank you very much. It was hugely full of meaningful ideas and thoughts, and it completely spoke to our desire to focus on the political, not only the technical, you know, in the personal, in the political as well, which I think sometimes very often gets left out of the dialogues on shiny new urban futures. It really is an immense pleasure to have this discussion with you. So, and thank you everybody for tuning in today. We hope very much that you'll maintain your curiosity and come back to us next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, our Urban Manifesto will be on the subjects of streets, another slightly different perspective, but nonetheless interrelated. Streets as places of commerce and culture. And we're going to have Indian architect Rohit Shinkre from Mumbai, and professor at the University of Mumbai, and Adam Walker, based in the UK, who's an entrepreneur and an expert in high streets and reinventing the high streets and town centres. So remember that the time is very important. It's we're a totally global platform, so it's 4:30 BST, 5:30 CEST, 9 o'clock. Yes, Prathima, 9 o'clock.
9 p.m. India time.
Yeah, 21 hours at India.
11 a.m. New York time.
Yeah, 11 a.m. New York time. Otherwise, check your local time zone to make sure you come at the right time, and then you can have the opportunity to ask our speakers some questions. So thank you very much, everybody, and look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.